We're here in the beautiful Amsterdam at the ABN AMRO headquarters at Blockchain Innovation Conference, and we meet MARTIJN Bolt. He's quite known in the Netherlands as a blockchain implementation specialist. How are you doing, MARTIJN?
I'm fine, thank you. It's a nice conference. We just got started. It's still early, so I'm interested in the applications of blockchain and the panels for today.
All right. So we see lots of examples here actually for permissioned blockchains. How do you see this development of permission blockchains versus permissionless? What are your thoughts about that?
It's becoming two worlds actually. It all started, of course, with the permissionless, open, transparent blockchain infrastructure, and that began in the early days with Bitcoin, and now you have a lot of those infrastructures. The way I see it is basically how Badruddin mentioned it this morning in his talk. It's just part of the transition. So we're here at ABN AMRO. It's a large multinational. It's totally understandable that you're not going to open up entire infrastructures where at this moment in time still are important business models for your organization. So you're gonna gain the advantages of open infrastructure step by step, and this is what was this morning in the discussion as well. This is logically how change happens. It's not going to be this big burst of changing everything at the same time. It will be gradual, and that is what you see with this new. To me, as an old-timer in the space, a new concept called distributed ledger technology. That's a deviation from the core blockchain principle, as in a sense of the governance mechanisms. And this distributed ledger technology is a perfect fit between existing business models and the step towards these more transparent, open, ecosystem-based models. So it's, I think, a normal transition. It's an expensive transition. The amount of opportunities and innovation coming from the open space and the transparent permissionless blockchains is incredible compared to the relative tiny improvements you get with hybrid models such as you mentioned, permissioned ledger technology. The faster we can move towards this societal model where you have this open infrastructure where everybody in society can basically help and build the technology and the solutions on top of that, the more innovation you get and the more fruits of your work.
And because we see existing big companies like Microsoft and even Facebook and JP Morgan's stepping into the arena of this new technology. And Microsoft, for instance, is the open source, has taken the open source route. So what do you think of that?
I think it's very smart. They leapfrog this phase of distributed ledger technology, and they switch to the decentralized open governance models from the get-go. So they're going to save themselves a lot of money, but it will take more time for them to get there, because with distributed ledger technology you can basically cut costs from the get-go today, while opening up these decentralized permissionless network takes a lot of investment and a lot of time for being adopted. But in the long term, it's expected that these more open systems, such as the internet, will be the game changers compared to these more closed models where you still need permission to join.
Yeah, there is this analogy with internet and intranet. So yeah, is it applicable on this new development? I mean, these were the 90s, but we're still. I mean, we're almost in the 20s. So
yes. Somewhat. So with the advent of the internet, we saw these shifts between centralization and decentralization, these shifts between transparency and openness on the one hand, and large companies basically harvesting enormous amounts of data, close that up and build business models on top of that.
Yeah, like names like you mentioned, like CompuServe, American Online, we all know them.
Yeah, CompuServe and American Online tried to close the internet protocol with a small group of users and basically allow people to interact within that ecosystem but not outside. And the internet forced those business models to basically break open and allow everybody to email everybody in the world. The prediction now is from the blockchain space that this distributed ledger technology variant is temporary, and in the future there will be use cases that need that specific aspects of privatized or federated models, and that's all fine. But the prediction, as far as I'm concerned, is that the majority of innovation will be in the open spaces, because in that entirely open built software and infrastructure, but also open implemented solutions, that allows everybody to join in. Every student with a little bit of money can basically push the innovation forward, or everyone in a pension that is interested and that has a lot of time can also collaborate and basically innovate together as a community. And that model, we've seen that many times, is incredibly strong compared to a small group of companies that have to do it with the capital at hand only within that group.
Interesting. And also even big companies like Microsoft, they actually they changed their strategy. I mean, you mentioned Microsoft Passport, for instance, but it was a complete disaster. People don't want to use it.
No, it was in the sense of adoption, Microsoft Passport. It was a good idea to have a global passport system that is fully digital. Yeah. But people don't buy into that. They don't want all their significant data controlled by this one multinational. So in that sense, that was a disaster. If you look at what Microsoft is doing now with Ion, they're opening up that same model using a permissionless blockchain. In this case, they use a Bitcoin blockchain. Add to that a layer of identity management that's also completely open and as an ecosystem managed. And from there on, they can now get that passport without exclusive access to your data. So they really changed the model. They don't focus on that data itself anymore. They now focus on the probability of this becoming big as an identification and authentication model, and then have new business models around that in the sense of added value, added services, company onboarding, etc.
And their advantage is actually the first mover, like you're the first mover in this industry, or what is their business model?
One of the things is first mover advantage. Why they leapfrog to that open model, they leave out all the distributed ledger alternatives and start from the get-go with the permissionless system. Their business model will be providing the world with an identity scheme that everybody can use. Also, the nations that don't have solid passports or solid individual identification. And as a multinational the size of Microsoft, they are one of the few in the world that will be able to provide a worldwide network with added value in terms of services and products. So that's probably their gain. Once this is big, as a first mover in an important space such as identity management, they can basically build the world of products on top of that and have a business model there.
And this can be, I mean, can we conclude that this can be like disruptive for especially the intermediates? We also know in Holland, like the government has all these intermediates protecting or how do you say, registering our identity, like IDIN. And what will be the effect on these intermediates?
Short term, I think not so much. We have a lot of regulation and we have a lot of privacy policies, for example, the GDPR, that are in place now. And we need to learn if these transparent, permissionless models actually can provide that security that we get from regulation today. In the long term, once products can be built on top of this infrastructure, compliancy will be built in. So in the long term, I expect the role of the intermediary will be shifting towards the infrastructure layer, and it's basically upfront compliant from the get-go. But that takes long to build. So the opportunities are there. While we get there, we still need IDIN, we still need the existing models, and in some cases we also need a shift in regulation, and that takes a lot of time.
Okay. Just a few more questions, Martijn, and because we can discuss many topics, of course. How do you see actually the development of the open protocols? I mean, perhaps we can discuss Bitcoin, Lightning Network. I mean, there's lots of excitement around the Lightning Network. How do you see the second layer solution? As a means of payment, let's start with the basic question: are we going to pay with cryptocurrencies?
In the retail space, I don't think that will be soon. For the simple reason that 99% of the people around don't understand money in the first place. They have a concept and they have an idea of what it is, but they see the functionality and that's about it. That functionality takes time to become user-friendly in this permissionless model, such as you mentioned, Lightning Network. From the automation space, I think this is going to gain traction much faster than it already does today. You see that for now, for example, in the gaming industry, gamers want to do transactions in regards to their virtual assets, and the gaming industry picks up these new technologies such as Lightning Network, for example, to provide a solid infrastructure that can basically ease that process, but that's under the hood for the user. The user only sees the interface that he or she is using. That will shift in my vision towards the Internet of Things. So having, for example, devices pay each other, or having all types of machine-to-machine, not only communication but also value exchange.
So no bank will intermediate?
Depends on regulation again. The banks basically are the regulators now, or they execute regulation for the government. It depends on the jurisdiction we're talking about, how that will evolve. But the jurisdictions that will allow for a certain amount of value, machine-to-machine interaction without a lot of KYC, for example, those jurisdictions will probably gain a lot of traction in terms of innovation.
Is it already happening? I mean, do you know examples of
Yeah, so for example, in the gaming industry, you have some projects. There's a lot of experimentation right now because the base layer, in this case Bitcoin and Lightning Network, is still experimental. There's a lot of extra adoption needed before you can use this as a viable functional solution.
Right. Perhaps a few questions. What makes Bitcoin revolutionary? What makes this technology so revolutionary? Yeah, it's a basic question, but perhaps if we walk around outside and people don't have any feeling with Bitcoin. Okay, speculation, casino, but
yeah. In my mind, not only Bitcoin, but this decentralized, trustless network model. What I think is the most revolutionary aspect of these technologies altogether is the decentralization of governance. So we're used to having organizations or governments govern specific parts of society. For example, to create wealth or to create social security or other aspects we need in society. And what these traditional structures tend to do, these hierarchical structures, is they get in place for a certain functionality in society. You can think about Chamber of Commerce, you can think about cadastral functions, you think about banking also. Notaries, all the traditional intermediaries mentioned when you talk about blockchain. We can now basically, as I said earlier, shift those guarantees coming from the intermediaries and regulation now, shift that to an infrastructural layer where basically the rules are set in stone in the shape and form of programming lines or code.
Smart contracts.
For example, smart contracts is an example of that.
Are there other, I mean...
Yeah, well, there's a lot of misconception there. In Bitcoin you have script, that's basically a smart contract language, but people don't tend to see it that way. I do see it that way, because the governance shifts. So normally you have the governance in this central institution, and now you get governance derived from the infrastructure, and that allows us to get rid of a lot of friction in the processes. Because we have these central institutions, after every transaction you need audits, you need accounting, you need all types of attestation, assessments to make sure that the transaction was valid and that there was no changing the rules during the game. With these smart contracts or script-like features such as in Bitcoin, this is upfront compliant. So every transaction transacting through this infrastructure is 100% guaranteed, validated according to the rules, because if it was not, it would not be a settled transaction. And then you don't need all these usually manual labor for the validation and auditing, because it's in the infrastructure. This takes time to build. We need to scale using, for example, Lightning Network or other second layer solutions. Or maybe it's even possible to scale on-chain, such as the teams are trying with alternative blockchains, such as Bitcoin, what is it, Satoshi Vision? Yeah. Let's hope so, because the more we can scale, the better.
What do you think of those hard forks and Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV? I mean, bigger blocks.
Yeah, that's also a governance question. In my mind, having these forks is part of the governance structure. It's similar to how we govern countries. Sometimes countries don't agree on something and they split up. They draw a new border. Now that shifts to automation, and this is what will continue to happen in this space, because people tend to get along on various things, but sometimes disagree fundamentally on other things, and then you have a split. No. I don't see a problem in that.
It's like the Protestant church, like we have all these splits.
It happens.
Yeah.
It's human nature, I guess, and that is translated to these infrastructures, and to me that is part of the governing model, because having the power to exit, to stop with what you're doing and start doing something new, that gives an incentive for the existing community to do it right. Because what we see in these centralized governance models is that the incentive to do it right decreases. Because once you have a monopoly, once you're the only one-stop shop for getting a specific service, everybody becomes dependent on you, and you become dependent on your vendor lock-in. And that's the big shift in this open governance model. There's a continuous drive to remain innovative, to stay up to date in regards to improving the service the infrastructure provides, and that's the big difference from centralized models, and that's why I'm enthusiastic about this specific subject, blockchain.
Okay, because we see, for instance, last question, with Facebook coin, the global coin, we see, okay, you can enter our nodes, but one node will cost you $10 million. So a node gets commercialized. Is that the way to go, or?
That's only logic. If you look at the transparent networks such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, mining in that space or validating the transaction to secure the network is done by multi-million companies. So that aspect will remain, and the difference is, I think, with the Facebook global coin is not the aspect of who can join and who can't join, but it's about the data ownership in regards of your assets. Okay. So in these transparent permissionless models such as Ethereum and Bitcoin, when you have a digital asset we call Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's really yours, as long as you keep your keys private.
Also with Microsoft Ion?
Sure, you can, with the Ion model it's not about digital assets in regards to value or translated to euros or dollars, but it's about identity value information. But that's also a permissionless model. We have to see what Facebook with the alternative coin they're producing is going to do. Will you be able to exit and switch around to a different protocol? If that is the case, well, then there's this incentive for Facebook to do good, or people leave. But if they're focusing on this traditional vendor lock-in model, well, we need to see if adoption still works in that old fashion.
Now, thank you very much, Martijn, for your insights. Always a pleasure to hear all these new insights, and have a nice conference.
Thank you.